What is up everyone, I'm Fish Shop Matt and today I'm partnering with BRSFresh and we're going to be bringing you all the info you need to know when getting started with bettas or fighting fish or whatever name you want to give them. Now I want to start by saying, even though we call all these fish a betta, betta is actually a group of fish and there are loads and loads of wild species of betta. Now the one we most commonly know is Betta splendans, which is the colourful one we see in the majority of aquarium shops around the world. Now in this video I'm going to be focusing on Betta splendans. As I say, it's the most abundant one in the hobby. But most of the info in the video can be used for your wild specimens as well. But to be honest, if you're after a certain wild species, it's probably worth going and doing some research on them too. So with fighting fish being bred in the aquarium hobby for so long, we have ended up with some amazing colours and some amazing fin shapes. Now fin shapes such as veil tails, double tails, half moons, plaquettes, crown tails, I've missed a few, but there are loads of different fin shapes out there. And alongside that you get loads of different colours, so you get things like reds, blues, greens, golds, coppers, white. And now we're even getting mixtures of colours, so we're getting things like koi bettas, galaxy bettas, bicolour bettas, tricolour bettas. There are literally colours and fin shapes to suit everyone. Now in the wild they're inhabiting slow moving streams and marshland, swampy sort of slow moving areas, even rice paddies they're found in. Now this habitat that they come from can vary massively, to be honest with you, but floating plants, terrestrial plants with their leaves and roots dangling are generally fairly abundant in the areas. Now this gives them places for territory and hiding and getting away from each other, because as the name suggests, they are a little bit territorial and a little bit aggressive towards each other. Now due to Betta splendans being introduced over Southeast Asia, the areas that they actually inhabit can vary massively. You will now also find things like woods and rocks that the bettas are going to be using as hiding places and territory markers. The other thing is that substrates that they're living over can again vary massively, from sands to leaf litter to gravels. It really is just about anything. So with their wild habitats in mind, how would you scape an aquarium for a betta? Well, to be honest, loads of aquatic plants, both below and above the water surface, is ideal. Maybe even a few house plants with their roots dangling in the water, because this is just going to give them more hiding spaces to feel secure and safe in your aquarium. Woods and rocks will also give your bettas places to hide and places to explore and keep them interested, to be honest. On top of that, the addition of leaf litter in the bottom gives a really natural look to your aquarium, and that tannin stained water that you get from using leaves and botanicals in your aquarium is really natural for the bettas, and I do find they really like it. But as long as you provide them with enough hiding spots and enough resting places that they can chill out, they tend to do well. You've got to remember that all of the Betta splendans of any weird and wonderful colour and fin shape are all going to be tank bred. So really, as long as you're providing them a nice home, you'll get along fine. Now it is crucial to give bettas good quality water. Even though you'll see them being kept in small containers and small pots and things like that, it is necessary to give them good quality water at home. Without giving them this, you're probably not going to succeed at keeping bettas. Now this being said, bettas do not like a lot of flow. You need to make sure that you've either got a filter with slow flow on it, or you're angling your filter or adjusting your filter so that it disperses the flow around the aquarium gently. You don't need them to be blasted around, especially the longer fin varieties. The other thing you could do is you could use an air-driven filter with a small air pump on it, just to give you a gentle flow through a sponge filter. That would also be ideal for keeping bettas. When it comes to pH, I have seen tank bred bettas being kept in anywhere from low 6s up to 8, to be honest with you, and this does totally depend on where they're being bred and who's keeping them and what they're keeping them in, to be honest with you. Wild bettas always generally like a softer pH of anything from 7 and below, and that is what I tend to aim for in my aquariums, because for me, I just find they do better in it. As with other water parameters, things like ammonia and nitrite you want to keep at 0. Things like nitrate and phosphate you want to keep to as close to 0 as possible. Now this can be achieved by obviously having good filtration, by having aquarium plants in there, good water change regimes, and being careful with your feeding. The problem with bettas is every time you come near the aquarium, they do beg for food, and to be honest, it's hard to say no to them. Temperature wise, they do seem to be fairly tolerant as well, ranging anywhere from 22 degrees Celsius, which is 71 Fahrenheit, all the way up to, I've seen like 30 degrees, which is what, like 86 Fahrenheit? I think I've got that right. What you've got to remember is in the cooler water, they're not going to eat as much and their body functions are just going to be a lot slower. And in the warmer waters, it's going to be reversed. You're going to find they're going to, well, eat and poop a lot more. So somewhere in the middle generally works perfectly for me. A vital piece of equipment for any fish keeper, in all honesty, is your test kit. Now, most of the time you're looking after your water rather than the inhabitants in the aquarium. If you get the water quality right, the rest of it's easy. Now, I'll test my aquariums fairly readily, and once your aquarium is mature, you can ease off on the testing a little bit. But what I would suggest is things like pHs and hardnesses. I would always keep a log of them and write them down somewhere. The reason for this is things can change slowly over time, and it might not be a problem at the start, but in 3 months' time when the pH has plummeted or something else has changed, then it's worth having those results that you can look back to and see where it was 6 months ago. As we've already mentioned a bit on Betta foods, it's probably best to talk about that next. Now, most Bettas don't tend to be overly fussy once you've got them at home. The key is to keep their diet varied. My main staple food for Betta will be a good quality pellet food. This way I can target feed them and make sure they're getting, 3 or 4 pellets a day, sometimes more for my bigger ones, but you can gauge that once you know your Betta. This mixed in with other decent quality foods like flakes and the occasional food, maybe once a week, of a frozen feed like bloodworms or Daphnia, is going to keep your Betta well fed and really healthy. Well, firstly, male Bettas obviously shouldn't be kept with other male Bettas. They can be very territorial and very aggressive towards each other. Sometimes I even put a screen between these two tanks because the male Bettas do see each other. But to be honest, I think they've got used to each other now and they hardly pay attention to each other. But weirdly, the same can't be said for females. Female Bettas you can keep in groups. Now, the size of the group does depend on the individual fish, but generally the more the merrier. Groups of 6, 8, 10, even more sometimes are better because you'll find that you won't get one female ruling all the other ones. Otherwise you can find one will take over and then will bully the other ones and they just won't come out and won't feed and just won't do as well. So generally female Bettas, the more the merrier. That being said, I have had friends and customers keep them in 3s, 4s and 5s, to be honest with you. And it does depend on so many variables. The tank setup, the size of tank, how many hiding spaces they've got, and even the individual fish. Bettas are probably one of the most characterful fish that you can get out there, and each one has its own personality, and it's the same with the females. You can get a super aggressive one that literally doesn't want to live with anyone. You can get a really timid one that will hide away at the back of the tank and just won't come out for anything unless you're stood away from the aquarium. It really does vary. So when it comes to keeping other fish in with Bettas, to be honest, it's a bit of a controversial subject and you'll hear many different stories with many different outcomes. Now, I've always found in a well-planted, maintained aquarium, you can mix small shoaling fish in with them. The main things is making sure they're not too small to fit in the Betta's mouth, they're not too big that they're going to cause problems with the Betta, and they're also not fin nippers, because obviously long fin Bettas aren't going to like that. But as with my tanks here, I've got this Betta living in with a load of chili rasboras, and they do absolutely fine. And I've got this Betta in here living in with a load of celestial pearl-danios. And again, they don't bother each other, they get along perfectly. But over the years, I have seen them kept successfully with probably hundreds of different types of shoaling fish, from neon tetras to harlequin rasboras, white cloud mountain minnows. To be honest, the list goes on. The key is remembering that every single Betta is different. Every single one has a different temperament, and you've just got to gauge yours to see how he is. But to be honest, 99% of my Bettas that I've ever kept have always lived with a small shoal of something in the tank with them. When it comes to bottom dwellers to be kept with your Bettas, it's fairly easy. Most of your peaceful catfish should get on absolutely fine. So things like your Corydoras catfish, your Otocinclus, and even in this tank I've got a small species of loach called a rosy loach. They do really well. Again, as long as it's small and not boisterous and not nippy, the Betta should get along fine and ignore the fish on the bottom of the tank. Now, the last animal that I'll discuss about keeping with Bettas is shrimp. Now, most of my Bettas have always lived with Amano shrimps, which is a slightly larger algae-eating shrimp. Absolutely fine, no problems. Again, it does depend on how boisterous your betta is, but most of the time these Amano shrimps are big enough and ugly enough to look after themselves. The other shrimp I'll touch upon is the cherry shrimp. Now, these are a bit hit and miss, to be honest. Again, it depends on the size and the aggressiveness of your betta, and it also depends on the size that you're putting your cherry shrimps in there. If you've got a good established colony of big cherry shrimps, the betta's probably not going to bother with them. But if you've got an established betta and you're trying to put tiny little small shrimp in with him, it's probably not going to end well. Breeding bettas is probably a whole video on its own, to be honest with you, but I'll definitely give you an overview and an insight. So if you're looking at breeding bettas, you are going to need several aquariums. You're going to need aquariums to separate them out, separate the males and females, and separate the babies. So it's not a one aquarium breeding project. Now you'll want to get the male and female into breeding condition away from each other in separate aquariums. Now this is done by giving them good quality food, good quality water, and eventually they will get into breeding condition. This, coupled up with warmer water in the male's aquarium, will generally mean the male will start building a bubble nest. Now once you see him building that bubble nest, it means he's ready, or at least getting ready, for breeding. Now once you've got the bubble nest built, it's time to introduce the female. Now it's not just a case of picking up the female and chucking her in and hoping for the best. You do need to introduce them to each other, I guess you would say. Now most of the time I would do this in like a jar or a fish bag or something like that. I would float the female on the surface of the male's aquarium and just gauge their reaction to each other. If the female's shying away and trying to get away in the bag, it's probably not a good sign. And that being said, if the male's not going up to the bag and sort of investigating, it's probably a sign that they're not ready. But if they seem receptive to each other, you can introduce the female into the male's tank, and hopefully the male will then usher her over towards the bubble nest and they'll start an embrace. Now once this happens, you should see eggs dropping to the aquarium floor, and the male will generally go and pick them up and put them into the bubble nest. Sometimes the female can help as well, but most of the time it is the male that does this job. Now this egg relocating can be done several times, but once it's all over, the female will generally try and leave the nest area. Now when this happens, it's your turn to get involved and get that female out of the aquarium so the male doesn't get too aggressive towards her. Now after a day or so, you'll normally see the eggs starting to hatch, and after about 3 or 4 days, they'll normally become free swimming and start actually looking like proper little fish fry. Now once they're at this free swimming stage, it's your turn to get involved with feeding and things like that. So prepared fry foods like the powdered foods you can get, or even things like infusoria, will be a good thing to start your tiny little baby bettas off on. And at this point too, it's probably worth noting that you're going to need to either separate the babies or separate the male out to make sure that, well, the male doesn't eat the babies. Like I say, there's a lot more to learn when it comes to breeding bettas, but at least this gives you a foundation or a base level to work from if you are interested in keeping and raising and breeding bettas. I hope this has been useful and helpful for you. Massive thanks to BRSFresh for having me on their channel, and well, I'll see you in the next one.